Week 11, ELA, and the week sets up to Monday, off for Indigenous Peoples Day. Tuesday, we begin a 2-day lesson on poetry that is to prepare us for our Thursday Poetry on Demand. Then on Friday, we're going to do a day-to-day that is based on the InfoLit on demand that we took last week. So let's have somebody read today's aim. For today is we will be able to analyze the theme of a poem. Okay, so a couple of things that we want to talk about. First of all, one of the major words we're going to underline is theme here, and let's draw a little dash, and I have somebody doing this on the board for us. What's theme mean again? What is theme? And that should be the message of a story. So yeah, that's what the author is, or what the story is saying about the topic. So that's the one thing that we want to identify. The second thing is poem. What do we know about poetry? Show of hands. Hopefully we get something. Somebody's probably going to mention that the words rhyme, and I will very smartly say not always. Hopefully that surprises some people. That poems are generally shorter than prose. They are closer to fiction generally than nonfiction, and that they're not just reporting something like we've been looking at articles lately as a subgenre of nonfiction. This is much different than that, and what I really want to stress is that when we read poetry, the biggest difference is that every line of poetry means something deeper or bigger, or is a part of a bigger idea than the mere literal significance of what it's saying. So everything that we read when it comes to poetry is going to mean something literally, and it's going to mean something figuratively. And I just now noticed that on the handout, thank you, Smack Suit, it says a theme is an author's message about the central topic of a text. So instead of having people recall what that means, ideally someone is going to see that and just read what a theme means. Then steps to determine the theme of a poem. We call on people to read these, 1, 2, 3. It says determine the conflict and resolution. If there's a conflict, what do we mean by conflict? We mean a problem. What are the different types of problems, the different types of conflicts that we see? We see internal versus external. What is internal? Something inside. What is external? Something outside. Good. And then we talked about major and minor conflict also. A poem is generally not going to have a major and a minor conflict. It's just going to have a conflict. We can call that the major conflict if you want, but there's generally just one, unless we're looking at some like Wordsworthian, longer Lord Byron type poem that goes for pages and pages and pages, and thank goodness we don't have to read those because I don't know how to teach them. Number 2, determine what the poem is mainly about. That seems simple, but it is crucially important. If you're going to identify the theme, you first need to identify what is the topic of the poem. What is this poem getting at? And then lastly, we say that we need to read to determine the meaning behind the poem by thinking about the message the author is trying to send through the conflict and resolution. And what do we call that? The theme. We do. So in the first day, we want to have the students read the poem individually, independently. I am then going to read the poem with you, the student, and then we'll have the whole class read through with substitution for glossary terms. And then what we're going to do, the way that we are going to read poems is we're going to chunk them by stanza. And what does that mean? Let's look at the poem now and figure it out. So someone read us, please, the name of this poem. It is Mask. Who wrote Mask? This is by Deb Westbury. And let's just look at the poem and the structure of it before we go any further. What are some things you notice about the poem right off the bat? Maybe someone says that it's short. Yes. They notice that in the margin there are glossary terms. Perhaps we go over those quickly. And then what about the numbers on the left side? These are the numbers of the poem. When we speak of poems, it's important to be specific. So like when we talked about wonder, we encouraged you to use page numbers as a way of giving more credibility to your writing. So if you were to say, use a detail from Wonder, it sounds more credible to say, according to page 92, I don't know, Jack, blah, blah, blah. So here, since the poems are shorter, there aren't pages generally in the poems that you're going to be reading in 5th grade. There are they're usually just like a page. We're going to need to identify the lines. Now, this seems basic, but I've had a lot of people mess this up. Notice how there's a 5, a 10, and a 15. What does that actually indicate? The 5th line, the 10th line, and the 15th line. So if I asked you to find the 3rd line of the poem, is that easy? Cool. What about the 12th line? The reason that we have these numbers and they're by 5s is so that if you need to find the 17th line, you can just go to 15 and then go down 2, because we can count, and that's how you identify that line of the poem. Okay, so we will read this first independently. We're going to give you 1 minute to do that, and then we'll do this. I will lead us, and then we'll call on readers to read by stanza. But last thing before you read, a stanza is a group of lines together. So we look at how many lines are in the first stanza. I asked that question. 5, 6, 7. If you said 7, you're correct. How many lines are in the second stanza? 6 lines. And in the third stanza, 3 lines. Okay, so we read, you read, I read, we read, and then we talk. I want to give just 30 seconds first to answer question 1. What is the poem mainly about? And hopefully we landed on the fear people have of being different. Okay, we'll pause there, but what we want to get at is how this doesn't just mean a mask literally. The mask represents us putting on a facade, a word that we get to, I think, eventually, meaning that we act differently. Most students can identify with the idea that some people act differently to fit in, and that's a theme that should be pretty consumable by the students. The second day we will have them answer the questions in the writing.